So, with the reboot of this podcast, I asked for your input on topics. And as I've been collecting those topics, I've been putting them into a semblance of order that would make sense as we start to really dig into redefining hustle and why it's important and how it matters for us to walk out our assignment with clarity, serenity, and fulfillment. And this episode is about boundaries, right? I want to ask you what comes to mind when you hear the word boundary. So, when you hear the word boundary, you think what? Boundaries is a popular phrase in the mental health and wellness arena. It's certainly a popular phrase in relationships, but do we think of setting boundaries in our business? I would submit to you that we're not really very good at that. Partially because we think that boundaries might limit us. We think that boundaries might keep us from finding those ideal clients or them finding us. Or sometimes we think that boundaries is sort of a little bit of laziness. For us ambitious women, we like the go, go, go of our business. And so the idea of boundaries makes us think we might slow down or something, right? So it's not always our comfort zone, but boundaries are critically important to walking out what God has given you to do for your mission in the marketplace. So, in this episode, we're going to unpack the definition of boundaries, and I'm going to refer back to that 4 keys to redefine hustle, that tool. So if you don't already have it, your number one call to action is to go grab that tool, and the link is below in my show notes. So let's start with a definition of boundary. So, what is a boundary? Well, it's something that indicates bounds or limits, a limiting line. It could be a dividing line or location between two areas. Sometimes I believe we put a boundary or a line in place between faith and business, right? But they're meant to work together and to have a boundary around it, protecting us to tune out the world and tune into God's truth, right? Boundaries are critical to our focus because while we want to keep our priorities in order, God, family, business, we also need to have a boundary that says when I'm with my Lord in my prayer time, as I'm starting and ending my day, when I'm in my study and my journaling, my boundary there is that I will be present with him and tuning out all other distractions, right? When we're with our family, we want to be present with our family. How often are we picking up our phone and getting into the social media or doing work when we're really having family time, right? And then the same goes for our business. In order for you to do business, this was told to me a long time ago. You can work your business part time, you can work your business full time, but you can't just work your business sometime. There has to be a boundary around that time. Employing tools like a good planner and time blocking are all ways of setting boundaries to keep us focused. So the boundary is not that meant to limit us, it's actually meant to focus us. If you can think of boundaries from that perspective. But why do we have such a hard time adhering to boundaries? Well, sometimes we have a hard time because we're in scarcity mode. We're in lack thinking. You know that this is a podcast that is all about the Bible and Jesus. So I am not talking law of attraction. But what I am saying is that we think that we have to work constantly because maybe we're not trusting that God is providing where he's guiding. Maybe we think, well, if I just put in a few more hours, then I could get that next new client. Well, but really, could you? Setting boundaries and being present in what you're working on is keeping the commitment to yourself in that moment. It's keeping to the commitment to the people around you in that moment. If you're spending that time with your family and holding that boundary, then no, you shouldn't be working your business at the same time. There is such a misconception, I believe, in many business models. And network marketing is one of them, that you can fit it into the nooks and crannies and you can work it around your family. But most of the time, we're not really working it around our family. We're working it at the same time we're trying to spend time with our family. Another great mentor taught me, when whatever you're doing, be present, right? So if you're being present with your family, then tune out the distractions. When you're being present with the Lord, tuning out the distractions. When you're being present in your business, tuning out the distractions. And so that does mean setting boundaries. And it does mean that those boundaries have to be communicated to your family as well. So, how do we even do that, right? One of the things that's critically important in your business is that you're having an open line of transparent communication with your family, with your significant other, your husband, your wife, well, husband, because you're all Christian women, right? And really understanding what are the priorities for your family. So what I recommend that you do is you sit down with your goals and your vision and your strategy, and you have that conversation with your significant other to say, this is where I see the Lord is calling me. Here's what it's going to take. Let's talk about how that fits around our family priorities, pulling out the calendar and putting all of the priorities for your family on there first, right? The games and the classes and travel and all of those things. And then you'll start to see the spaces of time to work your business pop up so that you can effectively work your business around your first priorities, right? Another tool that we use in my coaching is a focus 15 minutes. That's setting a 15-minute boundary. That comes in very handy when you've got so much happening that you feel like it all needs to get done. But if you can set a 15-minute timer and work on one project, one thing, one task, to its completion in that 15 minutes. Maybe you won't get all of the steps done, but you'll make progress because you've set a boundary, right? There's a great friend of mine, Krista Hutchins, who recently talked about barriers and boundaries on her podcast, Just One Simple Thing. It's episode 80. I'll link that episode down in the show notes. But I love when she talks about Psalm 16:6 and what David says here. The boundary lines have fallen for me in pleasant spaces. Surely I have a delightful inheritance. And what Krista says here about this psalm is that God doesn't give us boundaries to frustrate us or to harm us. He gives them to us for our protection and for our good. And when we live comfortable within our boundaries, we find ourselves in pleasant and spacious places. I really want to encourage you to go listen to that podcast episode. That's again, episode 80 of Just One Simple Thing, the podcast. But I want to employ our 4 keys here for setting boundaries, because if we don't learn to set boundaries, then our time gets away from us. We're not productive. We're not able to do the effective kingdom impacting work that the Lord has given us to do. And you know that I am all about helping you tune out the world, tune into God's truth and turn up focus. But you cannot focus if you are not setting boundaries. So let's walk through these 4 keys really quickly. If you have your 4 keys tool, pull it out. And again, if you don't, go grab it. It's in the show notes. So this first key is define, and it's to allow only God to define you, to define your purpose, and to define success for you. He puts boundaries around that. What are those boundaries? Well, he tells us in Exodus 20, verse 3, that he is the Lord our God, and we shall have no other gods before him. We are to trust him. We are to follow him. That is a boundary that protects us, because I don't know about you, but when I'm anchoring my identity to the world's accolades and the dollars and the client roster and all of those things, as those expectations or standards shift, so too does my identity. And therefore, I'm sort of floundering and treading water, right? So that is a boundary that he gives us, that he is our ultimate authority. He is our GPS, our great positioning shepherd. What else does he tell us? He tells us to renew our mind. That is a boundary that we should be renewing our mind, as it talks about in Romans 12:2, that we would be transformed by that, right? That is a boundary that we want to be pouring into our minds and taking every thought captive for his glory. And then in Ephesians 2:10, we all know this, right? That we are his workmanship, created for good works in Christ Jesus, right? That is a boundary. He's identified that for us. What about direction? the key of direct is to give God the reins to direct us. So how do we do that? Well, we know that from Proverbs 16:9, we can make the plans, but he guides our steps. That is a boundary. He gives us the guardrails that protect us. We know that through from Deuteronomy 31:8 that he is the one that gives us power to prosper and have success and wealth and whole person wealth, not just dollar wealth, right? That is a boundary because we have to allow him to direct us, right? So we can tune into that. And then what about discipline? Discipline is putting how he defines and directs us into action. Well, he gives us a boundary, just like he gave Joshua. Do not look to the left or to the right. Meditate on my word, and you will prosper wherever you go. That is a boundary. It is to stop coveting and stop finding ourselves spiraling in comparison and imposter syndrome, right? He gives us that boundary. And then, of course, John 15:4 and 5, the foundational verses for my ministry and my business, that he is the vine and we're the branches, and that without him we can do nothing. When we understand that our boundary is we're just a branch and all of our nourishment comes from him, that the world cannot fill us with nourishment. No achievement, no accolade, no stage, no dollar, no long list of clients, no high selling, high ticket offer can give us the nourishment that he can, right? That is a boundary. So, friends, I want to encourage you to grab on to this idea of boundaries. And I want you to ask yourself two questions. One, when I hear the word boundary, what do I think? And two, where do I need to be better about setting boundaries? Because the only way to walk out what he's given you is to allow him to define and direct you, to put that into discipline, and then allow him to develop you and to develop the opportunities for your business. But you've got to set the boundaries to do that. And I hope that this episode has shown you how to use this four keys to think about boundaries, how the Lord's boundaries are meant to protect us and give us guardrails and not have us kind of going off the highway in the wrong direction, not getting us caught up in the enemy's scheme to get us distracted and discontented and doubtful. He gives us boundaries. Lean into the grip that he has for you. Lean into his arms. It is a boundary to help you build this thriving business that he's given you. So two calls to action for you on this episode, besides thinking about boundaries, is to go get that 4 keys tool, which is down in the show notes, and then come visit my Rooted group coaching. My next live coaching is December 2nd. I'd love for you to sit in and dip your toe in and understand what it is to be surrounded by a community that leverages prayer and accountability and boundaries to build our business. And I want to pray for and encourage you, as always, until we're together again, to tune out the world, tune into God's truth, and turn up focus. How? Setting boundaries. I'll see you on the next episode.